dedicated to my son Sean Anthony Steele, in loving memory of my father Richard Steele.
Earth, or Phaeton, the offspring of the sun, or Musaeus, the son of the moon, they thus denominate them after this manner, and others differently conformably to the before-mentioned causes. With respect to other sons of the gods, however, we shall elsewhere speak, but again, Phaeton is indeed the offspring of the sun, as being of the solar series, hence also he has a solar name, since however, abiding on high, he revolved and governed the universe in conjunction with his father. He is said to have driven the chariot of his father, for the vehicle of Phaeton belongs to the solar chariots, since that also is entirely solar form. But when he fell into generation, for he did not rank among the first of souls, he is said to have been destroyed by the thunder of Jupiter. For thunder, that is lightning, is a symbol of fabrication, proceeding through all things without contact, and vivifying all things, but is not the cause of the dissolution of the spirit in which the soul is carried. But there are many transpositions of souls into different polities, and from one element into another, some being transferred from earth to the sphere of fire, but others from the sphere of fire to earth, and some in order, but others heaped together, and accompanied with much tumult and disorderly motion, such as Phaeton is said to have suffered, for being borne along on high collectively, and attracting empyrean vestments, he was moved through these in a disorderly manner, when he proceeded to earth, and produced in certain parts of it a conflagration. For souls in descending become invested with many garments aerial or aquatic, and some have empyrean vestments. Of these also, some have the vigorous, but others the vehement and the percussive, from fire, and some indeed, when they become situated in air, lay aside these garments, and assume others that are more gross, but others preserve them even as far as to the earth. I know, therefore, that the Charonian Plutarch relates, that in one of the islands of Britain, which appears to be sacred, and on this account is considered by the rulers of it as an asylum, the inhabitants frequently assert, when prodigious rains or thunder and lightning take place, that some one of the more excellent natures fails, they being accustomed to passions of this kind, but they denominate souls that are transferred into bodies, and that relinquish a certain generation, more excellent natures. It must not, however, be denied that such like circumstances befall souls descending into bodies, and especially those that are magnificent, and are allotted a more demoniacal essence, such as the fable obscurely signifies the soul of Phaeton to have been. But it is not at all wonderful, that descending souls should be in a greater degree copassive with those elements which are analogous to their presiding gods, and should attract and become invested with a greater number of such like elementary garments, so that Saturnian souls should in a greater degree rejoice in humid and aqueous vestments, and solar souls in such as are empyrean, each being desirous of obtaining a material and ponderous body, instead of immaterial garments, the gods also employing these as organs, in the same manner as they use material demons, in their productions about the earth. Through these souls likewise the gods produce conflagrations, or pestilence, or inflict certain other calamities on those who deserve to suffer them, and employing souls that are allied to them as ministrant to the causes of the effects that take place in the heavens, they accomplish that which they effect. For it is nothing wonderful, that there should be many causes of the same things, some producing in one, and others in another way. Phaeton therefore, being borne along about the earth, and after a certain demoniacal manner, burning those places to which he approached, through the stream of fire, for partial souls effect many things out of the body, being then the instruments of avenging or purifying demons, he was lamented by the Heliades, who were certain solar souls. Once also they were said to be the sisters of Phaeton, but they lamented him, not as alone commiserating him on account of his descent into generation, but providentially inspecting him, in order that they might in an undefiled manner pay attention to things which are generated and corrupted. For the river Eridanus and the falling into it, indicate the lapse of the soul into the river of generation, in which being situated, she requires the providential care of the genera allied to herself. and the aid of souls that are in a permanent condition. Theologists also signify the extension of the solar providence to mortal natures through tears. The much enduring race of men thy tears excite, Orphic Fragment 236, so that the fable very properly manifests through tears, in a symbolical manner, the providential attention to Phaeton of souls that are of the solar order. Again, therefore, this corollary may be assumed from the fable, that the descents of souls are effected through impotency, and that not only souls, but likewise their vehicles participate of the peculiarity of their leading gods, so that from these divinities, some of them are denominated solar, others martial, and others receive an appellation from some other god. It may also be inferred that destructions are effected by the providence of the gods, for Jupiter was the cause of the conflagration, by hurling the thunder at Phaeton, and likewise, that the descents of souls are suspended from the one fabrication of things. Hence Timaeus teaches us not only about the essence, but also about the ascents and descents, the lives and all various elections of souls. But the truth is, that it indicates the mutation of the bodies revolving, in the heavens about the earth, and signifies that through long periods, of time, a destruction of terrestrial natures ensues from the devastations, of fire. The Egyptian priest only unfolds thus much of the fable that contributes to the proposed discussion, that abundant destructions of terrestrial natures are produced through fire, in consequence of the mutation of the bodies that revolve in the heavens about the earth. But through mutation he signifies either the incommensuration of things in the earth to celestial natures, for all things while they subsist commensurately to the celestial effluxions, are able to remain, but when they are incommensurate to them, are corrupted. For things which are able to sustain the dividing power of Mars, are preserved, but such as are too imbecile to endure his effective energy, are easily dissolved, just as if your eye not being able to endure the solar light, should be blinded by its effulgence, though some other eye may be capable of looking directly to it without pain. And a similar reasoning must be adopted with respect to the other gods and their configurations. For the universe is one animal, and its parts sympathizing with each other, it preserves different things by different parts, nor is anything which is generated in it preternatural to the whole, for the natures which are generated in it, are generated through it, and it is the world itself which operates, and operates on itself. Or it may be said that this mutation is just as if a good father, who is always benevolently disposed towards his son, should on a time chastise him for the sake of his good, for in so doing he will appear to have changed his accustomed mode of treatment. Or this mutation may be the various configuration of the celestial bodies, for these are the bodies that revolve in the heavens about the earth, and at different times exhibit different figures, through the various intellectual perceptions of their informing souls. For the configurations are the letters of these souls, and certain efficacious impressions produced through them again. However, both these are true, for the mutation of these bodies, and the incommensuration of earthly natures, are the leading causes of such like destructions. But if it is necessary to call the fall of Phaeton from the heavens to the earth, a certain mutation of some one of the bodies that revolve in the heavens, it is not at all wonderful. For the mutation of the celestial gods is one thing, since this is an impassive transfiguration, but another, that of the souls that revolve together with them, this being a habitude to terrestrial natures, from a life without habitude, and that of places about the earth, is different from either of the former, since it is a certain corruptive mutation, according to which neither souls are changed, nor much less the gods, the leaders of souls. Such like corruptions, therefore, of terrestrial natures are effected through partial souls, but are also effected through demons alone, and as through these, destructions adapted to their series are produced, the like also takes place through souls. For the souls that when on high are delighted to illuminate immaterially, betake themselves to sublunary conflagrations. Why, however, do copious destructions of the human race happen through long periods of time? Is it because a concurrence of many things is necessary in order that such a destruction may take place? For it is requisite that there should be both a peculiar and common habit of the things that suffer, and a conspiration of the agents. For what if that which is corruptive of one thing should be preservative of another? It is also necessary that there should be an aptitude of matter, and a preparation of instruments and times. For these also take place in partial destructions, but more rarely in such as are common, and this reasonably. For it is necessary that the progression from an incorruptible nature to one that is easily corruptible should be through things which are corrupted with difficulty. If, therefore, wholes are always incorruptible, but more partial natures are easily corrupted, the media between these may be very properly arranged among things which are corrupted with difficulty, and which become destroyed in long periods of time. For wholes which remain during the mundane period are incorruptible and indestructible, for no configuration of the stars is destructive of them, since all things are evolved in the whole period of the universe, but partial natures and individuals receive an easy dissolution. Copious destructions, however, of partial natures are effected through long periods of time, but such natures are nevertheless dissolved, for there is a life of a certain genus, as there is of one man and of a city, and a nation. And as Aristotle says, there are periods of these, of some, more, but of others, less extended. Hence those who either dwell on mountains, or in lofty and dry places, perish more abundantly than those who dwell near rivers or the sea. This is likely to happen in the visible destructions through fire, for those who dwell near water are defended from the devastation of fire. The philosopher Porphyry, however, transfers what is here said from the phenomena to souls, and says that in these the irascible part is at one time effervescent, and this inflammation is the destruction of the man within us. Thus Homer represents the eyes of Agamemnon when he was enraged with Achilles, as shining like fire, but at another time, the epithymic part, being deluged by genesiurgic moisture, is enervated, and merged in the streams of matter. For, as Heraclitus says, another death of intellectual souls is occasioned by moisture, but if these things are rightly asserted, those will be inexperienced in the perturbations arising from anger, who have the irascible part in a relaxed condition, and commensurate to a proper attention to secondary concerns, for this is signified by hollow places, and such as are near to water. But those are inexperienced in the perturbations of desire, who have the epithymic part in a more strenuous condition, and excited from the somnolency of matter, for this is indicated by lofty places. For in a certain respect, the irascible part is adapted to be easily moved and to be efficacious, but desire is languid and imbecile. A musician, therefore, will be requisite, in order to relax the strenuous nature of anger, and give intention to the inertness of desire. The philosopher Iamblichus, however, thinks fit to survey these things physically, and not ethically. He says, therefore, that when a conflagration takes place, those perish more abundantly that dwell on lofty mountains, as being more remote from the exhalations arising from water. For these exhalations are not much elevated on account of the weight of the moist substance. Hence the air that surrounds them is not wet but dry, and becomes fuel to fire, which naturally tends upward. But the contrary takes place in deluges, for those that dwell in hollow situations are more abundantly destroyed, since all heavy substances naturally tend downward. To us, indeed, the Nile is a savior in other respects, and also because it liberates us from this destruction. According to the apparent signification of what is here said, the Nile is the cause to the Egyptians of many and all various goods, viz. Of geometry, of the generation of fruits, and likewise of avoiding conflagrations. Its water also preserves their bodies, and the divinity that connectedly contains this body, elevates their souls. But from these things you may assume, that first causes, being full of life and prolific power, connect themselves, and remain eternally, and also think fit to impart connection from themselves to other things, which are in a flowing and dissipated condition, so that the name of Savior adumbrates divine and exempt providence, from which also the light that is in the intelligible gods illuminates all the intellectual and demiurgic causes. But when the gods, purifying the earth by water, deluge its surface, then the herdsmen and shepherds inhabiting the mountains are preserved, while those that dwell in your cities are hurried away to the sea, by the impetuous inundation of the rivers. In what is here said, the efficient cause is clearly ascribed to the gods, and this also may be asserted of conflagrations, for purification is at one time effected through water, and at another through fire, but everywhere purification to secondary is from primary natures. Hence likewise in Orpheus, Jupiter is exhorted to bring purifications from Crete, for it is usual with theologists to arrange Crete for the intelligible, but the material cause of purification is here ascribed to the incursion of water, for each of these, that is fire and water, produces without deliberation and involuntarily, being borne along according to its own natural tendency. It is necessary, therefore, that there should be a pre-existent cause which employs them to beneficial purposes, and operates for the sake of good, which cause is beautifully ascribed to the gods. But if there are certain purifications in wholes, there are also powers that preside over these purifications, operating as purifiers on wholes prior to partial natures. There are likewise divine mysteries, some powers initiating, and others being initiated, nor will these ever desert the universe. The Egyptian priest likewise, knowing this to be the case, calls the destructions through water and fire by a sacerdotal name, purifications, but not corruptions, as he would have done if he alone physiologized. On the contrary, in a region, neither then, nor at any other time, did the water descending from on high pour with desolation on the plains, but the whole of it is capable of returning from the bosom of the earth, and hence, and through these causes, the traditions which are preserved here are said to be most ancient. Though rain may sometimes happen in Egypt, yet it does not happen in the whole of it, but usually takes place about the lower parts. This, however, says Aristotle, is evidently the work of the river, but the upper parts do not receive an afflux of this kind. Whence, therefore, does the Nile return? Porphyry indeed says, it was an ancient opinion of the Egyptians, that the water issued upward from beneath, by the ascent of the Nile, on which account also they call the Nile, the waterer of the earth, and that it returned from beneath, manifesting by this, that what is dissolved in Egypt preserves the Nile, not that the snow being dissolved produces the quantity of its water, but that it is loosened from its own fountains, and proceeds so as to become visible, being prior to this impeded and detained. We however understand the term dissolved, with reference to doubt, for speaking adequately, the Nile is dissolved, because it liberates us from doubt, for it is not true that from snow being dissolved the Nile is increased, for where in southern places, such as those through which the Nile flows, is there a collection of snow, nor does this river emerge from rarefied earth, for the rarity of the earth does not give to the water a motion upward, but it is entirely necessary that there should be something else, which impels it from cavities to lofty places, and thus much with respect to the Egyptian opinion. Others, however, say that the Nile is increased from certain rains that are poured into it, as is clearly asserted by Eratosthenes. Hence to return does not now signify to spring from beneath, but for the water, being elsewhere increased, to proceed above the earth. Streams of water poured into the Nile from other places. But Iamblichus says, it is not requisite to investigate a thing of this kind, but to understand in a more simple way the return of the water from beneath, as equivalent to what is usually called the ascent of water, and he assigns a twofold cause, through which the Egyptians avoid dryness, from excessive heat, and deluges, and this is manifest from what he says when examining the increase from rains, for he says, that the first cause of the salvation of the Egyptians is the will of their presiding gods, and the boundary from the first of fabrication, but the second cause is the temperature of the air, for the seasons there are contrary to those in the Antarctic regions, from which the Nile flows to these places, and in them the generation of dryness from violent heat, and of great rains, reciprocates. If, however, someone should blame this explanation, because the rains being increased the increase is not regular, it must be said, that rain frequently happens when there is no descent, or disappearance, of the Nile. At the same time, the uninterrupted succession of rain, and the magnitude of the mountains in which the fountains of the Nile are contained, are the causes of the unceasing increase of the water, for these mountains, receiving in all their sides the rain impelled against them from the annual clouds, pour it incessantly into the fountains of the Nile. But these fountains becoming exuberant increase the river. For this, says Theophrastus, is one cause of rain, viz. The pressure of clouds against a mountain. Moreover, it is not at all wonderful, if clouds are not seen about the cataracts, for the stream of the Nile is not first poured from these, but from the lunar mountains, which are thus denominated from their altitude, and the clouds when present being collected about the mountains, impede the cataracts by their superior magnitude, and thus much against the Egyptian oration of Aristides. Eratosthenes, however, says, it is no longer requisite to investigate the cause of the increase of the Nile, when we direct our attention to certain waters and rains that run into it, so as to corroborate what is said by Aristotle. These things, therefore, we have concisely indicated on this subject. But from these particulars the Egyptians infer, that their land will never experience either a deluge or a conflagration, that it should, however, fail from other causes, is not at all wonderful, since, as Aristotle rightly observes, every part of the earth becomes sea in the infinity of time, and the same place is at one time continent, and at another, sea. And looking to the infinity of time, it must not be denied that the water of the Nile may fail, for what if the annual winds, blowing less vehemently, should not impel the clouds against the mountains? What also, if the mountains should fall, in which there is a collection of clouds, the wind from subterranean places bursting them, through which, likewise, the oracles say, that succeeding cities shall be destroyed, and the clouds not being collected, the stream always becoming less and less, will be absorbed by the earth which is dry? But the truth is, that in all places, where neither intense cold nor immoderate heat prevails, the race of men is always preserved, though it is sometimes more, and at other times less numerous. The priest has spoken concerning the mundane periods, and the different mutations, in them, and has observed that the safety of the Egyptians is derived from the position of the region, and the providence of the Nile. Now, therefore, he infers in common respecting places of the earth, that every place which is free from deluges and conflagrations, has always the race of men remaining, more or less numerous, for the greatest destructions are through fire and water, as was before asserted. Someone, however, may say, that the race of men fail in a different way, for at present there are none who inhabit these very places of the Attic land, which were formerly so populous, though neither a deluge nor a conflagration has happened, but a certain dire impiety, which has entirely obliterated the race of men. Or it may be said that Plato now calls climates, places. He says, therefore, that every climate has men, though there should not have been a deluge or a conflagration, at one time more, and at another less numerous. Some however will also be saved in a deluge, as Deucalion, who was preserved, when the climate of Greece was deluged. After this manner, therefore, some unfold the meaning of the passage, but according to our associate, Domninus, Plato means, that every place has always a greater or less number of men, which is not excessively cold, or immoderately dry through heat. For mathematicians say, that there are certain places which are uninhabitable through excessive heat or cold. Every place, therefore, which is adapted to the habitation of men, and every climate, has a greater or less number of men, and this interpretation is reasonable, and conformable to the words of the text. For the words, whether neither intense cold, nor immoderate heat prevails, appear to signify, where neither of the contraries being excessive, impedes habitation, and, In short, since Plato had before observed that the transactions of the Egyptians were said to be most ancient, he very properly adds that in reality, every climate which is commensurate to the habitation of men, has always men more or less numerous, for not only mathematicians assert that not every climate of the earth has men, but Orpheus also, who says, the demiurgus for the abode of men, a seat apart from the immortals gave, where turns the sun's mid-axis stretching wide, between excessive cold and heat a mean, and this likewise Plato now asserts, when he says, where neither intense cold, nor immoderate heat prevails, the race of men is always preserved, though it is sometimes more, and at other times less numerous, with other nations. However, there is an oblivion of ancient transactions, not through the failure of men, but in consequence of frequent destructions taking place. Certain illiterate and rustic persons alone remain, but with us, says the priest, many most ancient transactions are said to be preserved, in consequence of everything being committed to writing in our temples, but whatever has been transacted either by us, or by you, or in any other place, beautiful or great, or containing anything uncommon, of which we have heard the report, everything of this kind is to be found described in our temples, and preserved to the present day, as the situation of the country and its guardian goddess impart safety to the Egyptians. Thus also the preservation of past transactions is effected by their own care and attention, through which they apply a remedy to the oblivion produced by time, but they are assisted in this by their temples, in which all great and wonderful actions are recorded, both of their own people and of others, and also paradoxical events of things, for this is the meaning of the words, or containing anything uncommon. The history, however, of these things contributes to their knowledge of similar events, from which the reminiscence of wholes is produced, and also to the knowledge of futurity, for through observations of this kind, they discover the effective powers of the celestial configurations, for assuming that certain things happen from certain things existing, they are able syllogistically to collect, from the same signs, the causes of future events. It appears also to me, that the doctrine of the Pythagoreans which prepares souls to remember their former lives, imitates such a history as this of the Egyptians, for as it is fit to assume different lives of one man, or rather of one soul, thus also different periods must be assumed of one nation. Hence, as in the one, the recollections of the transactions of the former life are perfective of souls, so in the other, the histories of former periods afford the greatest assistance to the acquisition of wisdom. Farther still, such observations are assimilated to the orderly distribution of the universe, for they imitate the stable productive powers of nature, through which remaining immovable, order is ingenerated in things that are mutable. If, therefore, the world is a most sacred temple, in which the productive powers that connect the universe eternally remain, the recording cf. ancient deeds in temples will be an image of the subsistence of these powers, and what is asserted by the Egyptians may signify, that whatever in sensibles is stable, of a firm consistence, and always subsisting after the same manner, proceeds from the intelligible gods, but that whatever is moved, and at different times is generated and corrupted in a different manner, is derived from the junior fabrication. For the sacerdotal genus by which mention is made of ancient transactions, conveys an image of the divine order, which is connective of wholes and of stability, and which guards all things by divine memory, and from which the junior fabrication being filled, imparts by illumination to things of a very mutable nature, sameness, connection, and permanency, while on the contrary, you and other nations, commit only recent transactions to writing, and to other contrivances which cities have employed for transmitting information to posterity. Iamblichus Life of Pythagoras. Contrivance is a symbol of the cause which always fabricates new things, produces things which are not yet in existence, and co-adapts all things to the one perfection of the world. For in our domestic concerns, we call the preparation of everything necessary, contrivance, and such also in cities, our literature and arts, forums and baths, and the like. But in the universe, contrivances are such things as receive a temporal and partial composition, as, therefore, temples signify the receptacles of perpetual productive powers, and also of such as are of a connective and guardian nature. Thus likewise cities manifest hypostases consisting of many, dissimilar, and mortal powers, but recent transactions only being committed to writing, evinces that the existence of such writings and arts, is of a more recent nature, and so again in accustomed years, a celestial effluxion rushes on them, like a disease. This also is evident in men, for deluges destroy their race, being excited indeed from the celestial periods, but having water for their matter. Hence the whole of this is called a celestial effluxion, and, as it were, a disease, because it is corruptive of other things. That, however, which is corruptive, is indeed to a partial nature evil, but to the whole of things good. But Plato says, in accustomed years, because such like destructions are accomplished conformably to certain circulations, which also have themselves a certain consecutive order with reference to the whole period of a divinely generated, or perpetually circulating, nature, this also seems to be manifested through these particulars, that such things as are alone generated from wholes are necessarily consummated according to mundane periods, which are defined by the same number, but that such things as happen from certain partial causes, will not entirely happen to be the same, though the configurations of the period are the same. In the universe, however, you may survey the same thing, by understanding that all generated natures are corrupted, and yield to the mundane periods, and to the circulations of the whole life, of the world, and that the periods are conjoined to each other, and accomplish one continued life. Hence those among you who survive, are illiterate and unacquainted, with the Muses, and thus it happens that you become juvenile again, and ignorant of the transactions of ancient times, as well of those among us, as of those in the regions which you inhabit, for from a deluge, Plato says, that herdsmen and shepherds are left, but that the inhabitants of cities are destroyed. Hence those that remain are illiterate and without the Muses, and on account of the former, indeed, they are unable through writing to transmit memorials of the pre-existent period, but on account of the latter, they are not sufficiently capable of preserving in verse or melody the events that happened prior to the deluge. Hence they become oblivious of all things, but through oblivion they return to the life of children, for an ignorant old man, says Aristotle, does not at all differ from a child in understanding. A thing of this kind, however, happens to souls that have recently descended into generation, for having exchanged for the former period, which was intellectual, a certain, secondary and gynesiurgic condition of being, they become oblivious of intelligibles, through the deluge arising from matter. Such representations also of intelligibles, through the deluge arising from matter. Such representations also of intelligibles, as they once had from the vision of them they lose in the progressions of time. Thus, therefore, everything in the world returns to juvenility from juvenility through regeneration being born along differently at different times, in consequence of the form of it naturally subsisting in motion. Moreover, the assertion that mutations taking place, those that remain, are illiterate and unacquainted with the Muses, indicates to those who consider it physically, that the analysis of bodies takes place as far as to that which is formless and without morph, and also that in this mutation, the destruction of the elements happens, which is manifested through the word illiterate, and the dissolution of harmony, which again the gods who are the inspective guardians of renovation, easily remedy, and restore to a condition according to nature. The transactions therefore, O Solon, which you relate from your antiquities, differ very little from puerile fables. The Egyptian priest compares the venerable and very ancient narrations of Solon to the fables of children, for the fables of the wise are about things of an eternal nature, but those of children about temporal things and which are of small consequence, and the former, indeed, contain intellectual concealed truth, but the latter, truth of a groveling nature, and which indicates nothing elevated. To the latter fables therefore, the histories of Solon are analogous, but to the former, the histories of the Egyptians. For the one look to that which is small, but the other have a most extended survey, and the one are only histories, but the other contribute to science. From these things, therefore, the paradigms also of them are to be surveyed. The effects, indeed, of the junior fabrication, are called the sports of the gods, and resemble fables, for they are the images of beings, and participate of forms in an ultimate degree. But the things which primarily derive their subsistence from intelligibles, are intellectual, eternal, and stable, and have the essence of themselves concealed. For, in the first place, you only mention one deluge of the earth, though in former times there have been many, for the deluge of Deucalion is much celebrated by the Greeks, though as the Egyptian says, there were many others prior to it. Thus also in wholes, the junior fabrication gives completion to wholes partially, and multitudinously, and renders that which is present in a good condition through regeneration. But in intelligibles, the causes of the first subsistence and of the circulation of forms, are antecedently comprehended unically, or according to the nature of the one. And, in the next place, you are ignorant of a most beautiful and excellent race of men, who once inhabited your country, from whence you and the whole of your city descended, though a small seed only of this admirable people once remained. But your ignorance in this affair is owing to the posterity of this people, who for many ages were destitute of literature, and became as it were dumb. The Egyptian wishes to conjoin the second to the former period, and to show that there is one connection in life of the first Athenians, and of those that now exist, through a small seed, as he says, remaining. For thus also in the world the seeds of a former period conjoin that which succeeds it to its principles, through the essence of causes, the unceasing motion of the universe, and as someone says, its immutable mutation. We must not, however, wonder if the priest now indeed says that Solon is the offspring of those excellent men, for we must again direct our attention to the cause of all mundane contrariety. For Solon, so far as he is an animal, possesses from them the genus, but so far as he is a partial intellect, receiving the narration of a war, he is analogous to the divinity, who transports the productive principle of mundane contrariety supernally from intelligibles to the sensible region. Nor is it proper to be disturbed by such like objections, but to know the nature of analogies, and that the same things through analogy become first, middle, and last. For prior to that greatest destruction by water, there was a most excellent city of Athenians, which surpassed all others in war, and was, in every respect governed by the most equitable laws, and whose deeds and polities are said to have been the most beautiful of all that we have received the knowledge of by the hearing. Under the heavens, Plato does not perhaps mean by the greatest destruction, the deluge of Deucalion, but some one of the deluges prior to it. But he calls the city of the Athenians most warlike, and governed by the most equitable laws, as being an imitation of its guardian goddess, whom he afterwards says, is both philosophic and philopolemic. For the Athenians partake of the warlike from the philopolemic, and of equitable legislation from the philosophic. By the most beautiful deeds he means the victory over the Atlantics, but by the most beautiful polities he does not intend to signify that they changed many of them, but he thus speaks, because one polity may be called the number of many polities, just as one world is connective of many worlds. For if the life of each individual is a certain polity, but the common life is the communion of many partial lives, the one polity will consist of many polities, the beauty of it depending on its union. He also adds, the most beautiful of all that we know under the heavens, because it is the first imitation of the polity of the world, so that you may say, it is the best of those under the heavens, for the paradigm of it is in the heavens, and thus much for particulars. Again, however, we should remind ourselves respecting the whole deed of the Athenians, that it is neither called a fable, nor a mere history, some indeed receiving what is narrated as a history, but others, as a fable, and some asserting, that, in the first place, the development of these, and such like narrations, appeared to Plato himself to be the province of a certain laborious and not very fortunate man, and in the second place, that what is delivered by Plato is not a thing of such an enigmatical nature, as the doctrine of Pharisees, but that he teaches with perspicuity concerning most of his dogmas. Neither, therefore, say they, should we force him to analyze, since the man proposes to instruct us without ambiguity. They also add, in the third place, that neither is a development in the present instance necessary, for the cause of the insertion of this narration is known to be the delight and allurement of the reader, and in the fourth place, that if we analyze all things, we shall suffer the same as those who in a slippery manner are conversant with Homer. Others again think that the development of this history should be referred to physical harmony, from what Plato says of the narration about Phaeton, that it has indeed a form of a fable, but that it manifests a certain natural event, since the Egyptians also, who, as Plato says, were the fathers of this relation, obscurely signify the arcana of nature through fable, so that the development of this narration will be adapted to him, who speaks in the person of the Egyptians. For as Timaeus himself, conformably to the philosophy of the Pythagoreans, makes his discussion from numbers and figures, as interpreting nature through images, thus, also, the Egyptian priest will teach the truth of things through symbols adapted to himself, to which may be added, that Plato himself elsewhere accuses those who speak everything from what is at hand, in order, says he, that they may render their wisdom manifest, even to shoemakers, so that he who delivers true assertions through enigmas, is not foreign from the mind of Plato, and such are the arguments of each. We however, say, that all these particulars are a history, and also an indication of the mundane contrariety, and the whole order of things, the history, indeed, narrating the past transactions of men, but symbolically comprehending in itself those things which are comprehended in the universe, and the mundane contrariety, for the progression according to opposition, commencing from the first intelligibles, divides the world by powers that are oppositely arranged, and if you are willing, we will divide the universe according to the divine orders, which are in uninterrupted succession, and survey, conformably to the Pythagoreans, the coordinations that it contains. From the two principles, therefore, it is divided into bound and infinity, or rather into things allied to bound and the infinite, for of things that are mixed, some pertain to the former, but others to the latter principle. But from that which is unfolded into light is the third after these principles, the universe is divided into the united and the multiplied. 5 For their multitude first subsists unitedly, from the triad that is next to this, it is divided into things perpetual, and things corruptible. 0 For the measure of existence to all things is derived from thence. From the third triad it is divided into the male and female 0d for in this each of these primarily subsists. But from the first triad of the next order, it is divided according to the even and the odd, for number characterized by unity there. From the second triad, it is divided into the partial and the total, and from the third, into the straight and the circular. Again, of the intellectual triads, it is divided, according to the first, into things that are in themselves, and things that are in others, according to the second, into things animated and things inanimate, into things stable and things which are moved, but according to the third, into things that are the same and things that are different, and from the order of rulers, indeed, it is divided into things which rejoice in similitude, and things allied to dissimilitude, but from the liberated order, it receives a division into the separate and the inseparable. These things, therefore, which have an arrangement elsewhere, have now also been as it were explored by us, for according to each division, the goodness of better natures, desiring to fill things subordinate, and to take away depravity, produces war, but the desire of less excellent natures, to divulse a certain portion of beings, of a more excellent condition, excites the apparent opposition of things, since in war, also, those that contend against each other, wish to reduce into their own power the property of their opponents, and entirely destroy them. These things, therefore, are evident. We may, however, understand the opposition of powers in the universe, by making a division after the following manner, into the adorning and adorned, and, in the first place, indeed, into things superessential and essences, for the genus of the gods is superessential. In the next place, by dividing essences into eternal lives, and those which energize according to time, likewise, those which energize according to time, into souls and bodies, into such as are celestial, and such as subsist in generation. These, likewise, we must divide into wholes and parts, for the division extends as far as to these extremes. And, again, we must divide superessential natures into the divine peculiarities, such as the male and the female, the odd and the even, that which unites, and that which separates, the stable and the motive. But eternal natures must be divided into total and partial essences, and such as are total, into the divine and angelic. Souls are to be divided into the divine, and the attendants on the divine, and divine souls, into the celestial, and those that pay a providential attention to generation. Souls, likewise, that follow the gods, must be divided into those that follow them perpetually, and those that are frequently separated from them, and the division of those that are separated from them, is into those that preside over generation with undefiled purity, and those that become defiled with vice, for the descent is as far as to these. Moreover, the celestial bodies must be divided into the inerratic and erratic, and these, into such as are moved with a simple, and such as are moved with a various motion. The latter, also, must be divided into the peculiarities of powers, and universally the division in all the above-mentioned orders, is into that which adorns, and that which is adorned, that which fills, and that which is filled. If however, it be requisite, not to look to a part, but to adhere to the intellectual conception of wholes, it must be admitted that this opposition subsists everywhere, for it is in gods, and in intellects, in souls, and in bodies. For in the first of these, there is bound and infinity, in intellects, sameness and difference, in souls, the circle of the same, and the circle of the different, and in bodies, heaven and generation. But secondary natures are always arranged with reference to such as are excellent. Hence, also, we say that this narration is useful to the whole theory of nature, as indicating to us the mundane contrariety from energies and motions, for all the teachers of physiology begin from contraries, and make these to be principles, which Plato also knowing, delivers to us, through symbols and enigmas, what the contrariety is of the genera in the universe, and how less are subjugated to more excellent natures, through the intellectual energy of Minerva. Farther still, Plato very properly calls the polity the work of the Athenians, because it is requisite that such an analogy as this which the junior fabrication connects, should proceed through all things, but that total powers should by a much greater priority effect this, from which also the junior fabrication being filled, gives subsistence to mundane intellects, to souls and bodies, conformably to the peculiarity of itself. Solon, therefore, on hearing this, said that he was astonished, and, burning with the most ardent desire, entreated the priests to narrate everything pertaining to his ancient fellow citizens. This, likewise, is the peculiarity of divine natures, viz. For such as are secondary, genuinely to adhere to such as are first, and to be established in their undefiled intellectual perceptions, but for such as are first, to impart by illumination their own plenitude to such as are secondary, through unenvying exuberant power and goodness. Wonder, therefore, precedes, because in us, also, this is the beginning of the knowledge of wholes, but in divine natures, it conjoins that which wonders with the object of wonder. Hence, likewise, those who are wise in divine concerns celebrate Thomas, plus, whose name is derived from Thoma, wonder, as one of the greatest of the gods, who through wonder inclines secondary to primary natures, but ardent request follows, rendering that which ought to partake of more perfect goods, adapted to the participation of them, that afterwards, one of the priests said, "Nothing of envy, O Solon, prevents us from complying with your request, but for your sake and that of your city, I will relate the whole, and especially on account of, the goddess, Solon being an Athenian, has a resemblance to the tutelar goddess Minerva, so far as he adheres to more perfect intellectual perceptions, and the priest resembles one speaking, as it were, from a certain addendum, for he teaches what was committed to writing in the temples, and presents to us an imitation of the middle orders of the junior fabrication, and of the whole paternal cause, which orders transmitting the gifts of a more elevated to a subordinate cause, fill from that as from a certain fountain the divine order. All things, likewise, are elegantly effected by the speaker, for Solon is perfected, the city is praised, and the goddess is celebrated. The ascent also is from Solon to the goddess through the city as a medium, imitating the convertive power of the goddess, and this, likewise, is indeed beneficent, viz. To energize for the sake of the perfection of secondary natures, for it imitates zero providence, and the superplenary power of divine beings, but it is in a still greater degree beneficent, to energize for the sake of the city, for the energy is more ample, and embraces a greater power. Besides this, it is still more divine to extend all the narration to the goddess, and to terminate the whole energy in her, all which, the unenvying communication of the priest genuinely represents to us, not only indicating the privation of envy, but the divine and prompt generation of good. Again, however, we must not be ignorantly disturbed, if now indeed the priest as being the dispensator of the narration, is said to adumbrate a greater and more divine cause, but at another time, the Athenians being the ancestors of Solon, are more ancient than the inhabitants of Sais, the Athenians being arranged according to the mundane causes of the whole contrariety of things, for so far as pertains to the narration, they have this order, but so far as pertains to physical progression, they bring with them an image of certain more elevated and divine orders, and if you are willing so to speak, since all fabrication, and the mundane contrariety, are antecedently comprehended in the Father of wholes, together with adorning causes, and things which are adorned, you may there also assume according to analogy, the paradigmatic cause of the Athenians in intellectual lives, for again, the veil, of Minerva, is the last image of the whole contrariety of things, but in the universe, the true works of the gods have a precedency, and likewise in the productive and primary causes of them, where also it is said, Minerva became apparent, invested with armor, or rather, the veil is the last work of the weaving art, containing in itself an image of the mundane war, and of the demiurgic order proceeding from the goddess into the universe, which veil she wove in conjunction with her father. A better image however of this, is that which in the narration of Plato, and in Enigmas, represents to us the whole contrariety of things, and of the works of Minerva, which narration contributes to the whole, descriptive, fabrication of the world, in the same manner as the veil to the splendid procession of the goddess, and the whole of the solemnity, for the Panathenaea is an image of the Minerval fabrication in the universe. The veil, however, is superior to both these, which is woven in the universe, in the intellectual light of Minerva, for contrariety is spread under the one life of the world, and the war is a part of the fabrication of things, which the ruling art of Minerva arranges in a becoming manner, and prior to all these, is the veil, which is pre-established in paradigmatic causes in the intelligible, and is comprehended in the one intellectual perception of Minerva. For, in weaving, all the immortals she excels, says Orpheus, hence, the weaving art is there primarily, and the veil of the essence of this goddess, which essence is all things intellectually, that the universe is according to a mundane characteristic, for in ruling over the war of the universe, she does not look anywhere else than into herself, That we may however recur to the thing proposed to be considered, the Egyptian priest directly imitates the unenvying providence of the Demiurgus, about which Plato a little farther on says, "He was good, but envy never subsists in him who is good, about anything, for the orders which exist proximately with him, have from him, and on account of him, an unenvying participation of good, and through this privation of envy, the priest fills indeed the mind of Solon, but praises the city, and celebrates the tutelar goddess, conjoining partial and total natures, uniting things contained to the things that contain them, and suspending all things from the goddess, according to one bond and one series, who is allotted the guardianship both of your city and ours, and by whom they have been nourished and educated, the Egyptian, after a certain admirable manner, converts all things to the goddess, and produces them from, and again converts them to her, for recurring from a citizen through the city to the power who presides over it, he makes this conversion, but again proceeding from the goddess to the natures that primarily, and also to those that secondarily participate of her, he imitates the progression of things from her divinity, again also asserting that the participants are nourished and disciplined by the goddess, he likewise converts these to her. How is it possible, therefore, that these particulars should not in an admirable manner imitate demiurgic powers, which are established in natures prior to themselves, and generate those posterior to, and convert them to the causes of themselves, and thus much concerning these particulars, what, however, is the meaning of this allotment, and how are the gods said to be distributed into the universe? Of allotments therefore, some are those of partial souls, and others, of the undefiled genera. Some are demoniacal, others angelic, and others, of the gods themselves, for if the Father of the universe was one alone, and there was only one providence and one law, there would be no need of allotments, nor of divine distribution. Since, however, after the one Father there is a triad, after the uniform a multiform providence, and after one law a multitude of fatal laws, it is also necessary that there should be a division of the subjects of government, and another providence and order about other things. Through this cause therefore the universe is divided by demiurgic numbers, viz. By the duad, triad, tetrad, pentad, hebdomad, and odicad, for after the one fabrication, the section of the universe into two, heaven and generation, constitutes twofold allotments, the celestial and genesiurgic. After this, the triad divides the universe, about which Neptune in Homer says, "To me by lot belongs the hoary deep, the spacious heaven to Jove, to Pluto, Hades dark." The tetradic distribution follows the triple order, giving a fourfold arrangement to the elements in the universe, as the Pythagoreans say, celestially and ethereally, above the earth, and under the earth. Next to this is the fivefold division, for the world is one, consists of 5 parts, and is appropriately divided by celestial, imperial, aerial, aquatic, and terrestrial figures, and presiding gods. After this allotment, the division into 7 parts follows, for the heptad beginning supernally from the inerratic sphere, proceeds through all the elements, and after all these, is the allotment of the universe defined in the dodecad. From the divine allotments, however, the allotments of angels and demons are suspended and have more various distributions, for one divine allotment is comprehensive of many angelical, and of a still greater number of demoniacal allotments, for every angel rules over a multitude of demons, and every angelical allotment has about itself many demoniacal allotments, for what a monad is in the gods, that a tribe is to each allotment in demons. Instead of a triad, therefore, we must assume 3 companies, and instead of the tetrad or dodecad, 4 numbers and 12 choirs, following their respective leaders, and thus we shall always preserve the higher allotments, for as in essences, as in powers, as in energies, progressions generate multitude, thus also in allotments, those that rank as the first, have a precedency in power, but are diminished in quantity, as being more proximate to the one Father, and to the total and one providence. but those that are the second in rank are allotted a diminished power and an increased multitude. These things therefore are to be considered in common about allotments. Since, however, we have divided allotments according to a section into two, into the celestial and sublunary. Concerning the former indeed there can be no doubt respecting the nature of them, and whether they always remain invariably the same. But the sublunary allotments are deservedly subjects of admiration, whether they are said to be perpetual, or not. For if they are perpetual, how is this possible? For how, since everything in generation is mutable and flowing, can the energies of the powers that providentially inspect it be perpetual? For the things that are in generation are not perpetual, and if these energies are not perpetual, how is it that divine inspection subsists differently at different times? For an allotment is neither a certain separate energy of God's, in order that things in generation being changed into another condition, this energy may remain exempt and immutable, nor is it alone that which is governed, in order that no absurdity may follow from the allotment flowing and sustaining all various mutations, but it is an assigned state, providence, and unrestrained government of divinity, about these sublunary concerns, and on account indeed of the subject of government, the definition of perpetuity cannot be applied to it, but on account of its being, always, present, it is destitute of corruption, in order that we may not ascribe to the gods the passion of partial souls, by assigning them different allotments at different times. Hence it remains for us to show how allotment is to be explained, so as to preserve the immutable in the gods, and mutability to things in generation. Perhaps therefore the discussion of this affair will be easy, by having recourse to that theory, which we have frequently elsewhere employed, viz. That everything in generation, and generation itself, must not be considered as alone consisting of mutable and flowing things, but there is also in these something immutable, and naturally adapted to remain always the same, for the interval, which receives all the parts of the world, comprehends them in itself, and is extended through all bodies, is immovable, lest, if it belong to things which are moved, it should also itself require another receptacle, and this should be the case ad infinitum. The ethereal vehicles likewise of divine souls, with which these souls are circularly invested, and which imitate the lives in the heavens, have a perpetual essence, and are eternally suspended from divine souls, being full of prolific power, and performing a circular motion, according to a certain secondary circle of the celestial orbs. And in the third place, the wholeness of the elements remains always the same, though the parts sustain in all various corruption, for it is necessary that each form of the universe should be never failing, in order that the universe may be perfect, and that being generated from an immovable cause it may be immovable according to essence. But every wholeness is a form, or rather it is that which it is said to be, through the participation of one entire form, and here you may see how the nature of bodies proceeds in a becoming order. For one thing, that is the interval of the universe, is immovable according to every motion, but another thing, that is the vehicle of divine souls, receives motion only according to place, for this is most remote from essential mutation, and another thing, that is the wholeness of the elements, admits of other mutations in its parts, but the whole remains entirely immutable, and the celestial allotments indeed, proximately dividing the interval, divide also together with it the heavens. But with respect to the sublunary allotments, in the first place indeed they are allotted portions in the interval of the universe. In the next place, they make distribution according to the definite vehicles of souls. And in the third place, they remain always invariably the same, according to the whole parts of generation. The allotments of the gods therefore do not change, nor subsist differently at different times, for they have not proximately their hypostasis in that which is changed. How, therefore, do the illuminations of the gods take place in these? How are the dissolutions of sacred rites effected? And how is the same place, at different times occupied by different spirits? May we not say that the gods possessing perpetual allotments, and dividing the earth according to divine numbers, similarly to the sections of the heavens, these divisions of the earth also are illuminated, so far as they possess aptitude, but the circulation of the celestial orbs produces indeed this aptitude, through certain configurations, divine illumination at the same time, imparting a power more excellent than the existing nature. Total nature likewise, or nature considered as a whole, produces this aptitude, inserting divine impressions in each of the things illuminated, through which these spontaneously participate of the gods, for she inserts different images of the divinities in different illuminated parts, in consequence of these parts being suspended from the gods. Times also affect something, according to which the conditions of other things are governed. The good temperament of the air too cooperates, and, in short, everything about us contributes to the increase and diminution of this aptitude. When, therefore, according to a concurrence of these many causes, aptitude to the participation of the gods is generated in some one of the things naturally disposed to be changed, then divinity is unfolded into light, even in these mutable natures, he being before concealed through the inaptitude of the recipients, possessing indeed eternally his proper allotment, and always extending the participation of himself, but not being always received by these terrestrial places, on account of their inaptitude, but in the same manner as of partial souls, which choose different lives at different times, some choose such as are adapted to their proper gods, but others such as are foreign, through an oblivion of the divinities to whom they are allied. Thus, also, of sacred places, some are adapted to the power that has there his allotment, but others are suspended from another order, and on this account, says the Athenian guest, some are accustomed to be more prosperous, but others more unfortunate. Whether, therefore, the delistic or legislative art dedicates this particular city to the divinity who, according to an eternal allotment from the beginning, received this portion of the earth, the life of the inhabitants, is through this in a greater degree assimilated to the tutelar deity, and the works of him who looks to this divinity in effecting them, are rendered more correctly great and admirable than those of the man who is not impelled to action from a principle of this kind, and he who chooses a life conformable to that of the allotted deity, acts with greater rectitude than he does who transfers himself to another order, conformably to this mode. Therefore, the Egyptian says, that Minerva is allotted the city which is named after her, and also his own city Sais, inferring this perhaps from the great similitude of the life of the citizens to the goddess, and perhaps also perceiving that there was an allotment of this kind, from the delistic art, and sacerdotal works, for as of the other gods, so likewise of Minerva, there is an allotment proceeding supernally from intellectual causes to the place of the earth, her allotment therefore is first in her father, but in the ruling gods according to a second order. In the 12 liberated gods, it makes a third progression, but after this, it unfolds itself into light in the heavens, with unrestrained authority, in one way indeed, in the inerratic sphere, for there a certain allotment of this goddess is expanded, whether it be the place about the ram, or that about the virgin, or whether it be some one of the northern stars, as some say it is the Electra, which is there, but in another way, it is unfolded into light in the sun, for there, according to theologists, an admirable power, and a Minerval order, governed wholes in conjunction with the sun, and again, in another way in the moon, for Minerva is the monad of the triad which is there, but in another way in the earth, according to the similitude of the allotments of the earth to the celestial distributions, and lastly, about the earth differently in different places, according to the peculiarities of providence. It is not therefore at all wonderful, if one divinity should be said to be allotted both Athens and Sais, for the same thing must not be supposed to take place about the gods, as about partial souls, which are not adapted to dwell in two bodies at the same time, because they exert a providential energy in conjunction with habitude. But there is indeed a participation of the same power in different places, and in the one power there is also multitude. This power likewise is differently participated by different places, and in some, sameness is more abundantly participated, but in others, difference. These things therefore are truly asserted, and the allotments of the gods are perpetually established in the universe. These likewise existing, there are different temporal evolutions of the mental light, according to different places. Ancient theology also manifests the perpetual essence of the allotments, as when it is said in Homer, "To me in ocean's hoary deeps to dwell, always, by lot belongs," for the word always is significant of perpetuity, and in short, since it is necessary that prior to things which sometimes, there should be natures which always, participate of the gods, it is likewise necessary that perpetual allotments should exist prior to such as are temporal. For as demons prior to partial souls follow the gods, thus also there are perpetual allotments suspended from the gods, prior to partial illuminations, and the mundane gods comprehend these allotments, the terrestrial gods, such as are terrestrial, the aquatic, such as are aquatic, and the aerial, such as pertain to the air. These gods likewise, prior to visible bodies, ride in ethereal vehicles, conformably to the gods in the heavens, but whether it must be admitted that there are other sublunary allotments, proceeding from on high in conjunction with divine light, must be elsewhere considered, for what has been said is sufficient for the present. Yours indeed, by a priority to ours of 1,000 years, receiving the seed of your race from Vulcan and the earth, with respect to the fabrication of Vulcan, how may someone decide, so as not perfectly to fail in his conceptions of the power of the god? For the assertions of the multitude concerning him, belong to things which must be entirely rejected, but that which is said by those whose notions are more intellectual is indeed true, but requires no small degree of confirmation. We shall therefore introduce to our discussion from theologists, credibility concerning this divinity. That Vulcan then is of the demiurgic, but not of the vivific, or connective, or any other series, is manifested by theologists, when they represent him as fashioning things from brass, employing the bellows, and, in short, when they call him the artificer, but that he is the fabricator of sensible, and not of psychical, or intellectual works, is also manifested by them, for the formation of a mirror, the exercise of the brazier's art, lameness, and everything of this kind, are symbols of his productive energy about a sensible nature. Moreover, that he is the maker of all sensibles, is evident from the same theologists, who say that he was hurled from Olympus as far as to the earth, and who make all the receptacles of the mundane gods, to have been elaborated by Vulcan. If, therefore, we admit that these things are true, this god will be the fabricator totally of every corporeal formed substance, preparing for the gods their visible seats, rendering all things subservient to the one harmony of the world, filling all fabrications with corporeal life, and adorning and connecting with forms the resisting and gross nature of matter. On this account also he is said by theologists to fashion things from brass, as being the artificer of resisting solids, and because the heavens are said to be brazen, as being an imitation of the intelligible, the maker of the heavens is likewise fabled to be a brazier, but he is lame in both his feet, as being the fabricator of things that are last in the progressions of being, for such are bodies, and also as being no longer able to proceed into another order. Likewise, because he is the maker of the universe, which, as Timaeus says, is without legs, and he was hurled from on high to earth, as extending his fabrication through the whole of the sensible essence. Whether, therefore, there are said to be certain physical productive principles in the universe, or whether there are spermatic principles, the cause of all these must be referred to this God, for that which nature effects by verging to bodies, this God fashions divinely and exemptly, exciting nature, and using her as an instrument to her own fabrication, for innate heat is Vulcanian, being generated by Vulcan is subservient to corporeal production. The productive cause therefore of generated natures is referred, in what Plato says, to this God, Since however matter is necessary to things that are generated, for the gods in the heavens borrow parts from the universe, as things which will be again returned, for the generation of mortal animals, this also Plato delivers to us, in a very admirable manner, through earth. For in seed itself, there are productive powers, and a subject, and the former are derived from the art of Vulcan, but the latter from earth. For by earth, we must now understand every material cause, not that the Athenians sprung from the earth, but because it is usual to call all generation earth, and everything material, earthly. Fire, therefore, is a Vulcanian instrument, but earth is matter, which is excited and vivified through fire, since it is of itself lifeless. Hence also, in consequence of this being filled, the material order is now assumed in conjunction with Vulcan, and on this account it is said that the seed of Vulcan, together with earth, gave subsistence to the generation of the Athenians, for according to the fable also, Vulcan being in love with Minerva, emitted his seed on the earth, and from thence the race of the Athenians blossomed forth. In short, therefore, Vulcan is always in love with Minerva, imitating her intellectual nature, in the fabrication zero of sensibles, but Minerval souls, according to this energy of Vulcan, especially receive vehicles from him, and are introduced into bodies from the productive powers of Vulcan, and the hypostasis zero of earth, the productive powers receiving Minerval impressions, for this god, prior to nature, is the perfecter of bodies, inserting in different bodies, different symbols of the divinities, what however are the 1,000 years, according to which the Athenians are prior to the inhabitants of Sais. This, therefore, may be said historically, but it seems also to signify the temporal priority of the life of the Athenians, and in short, that it is necessary their life should be more elevated than that of the Satans, for as in the invisible orders of things, many genera are suspended from the same leader, some indeed more proximately, but others more subordinately, after the same manner also, of Minerval souls descending into generation, some are assimilated to Minerva, according to the highest degree of excellence, but others subsist proximately after these, 1,000 years, therefore, signify this excellence, for they are the measure of a perfect genesiurgic period, on account of 1,000 being a cubic number. Hence this number is very properly adapted to a life superior according to generation, and which is in a greater degree assimilated to the tutelar goddess. If also you wish to transfer these things to the universe, you may there behold all the visible fabrication which is Vulcanian, and adorning causes and adorned effects, some of which are more total, but others more partial, and some being analogous to the Athenians, but others to the Satans, for nothing hinders, but that the same things may be surveyed analogously, in demiurgic causes, in the universe, and in an historical narration. The divine Iamblichus however doubts, how the gods are said to be allotted certain places, according to definite times, as for instance, Minerva was first allotted Athens, and afterwards Sais, for if their allotment commences from a certain time, it will also at a certain time cease, for whatever is measured by time, is a thing of this kind. Farther still, with respect to the place which they are allotted at a certain time, was it without a ruler, when it fell to their lot, or was it under the dominion of other gods? For if, indeed, it was without a ruler, how is it possible that anything belonging to the universe can be perfectly destitute of divinity? How, in short, can any place remain without the guardian protection of more excellent natures, or how, if it is sufficient to the preservation of itself, can it afterwards become the allotment of some one of the gods? But if it is under the dominion of another leader, it will also fall to the allotment of another god, and thus an absurdity will ensue, for the second god does not divulge the prefecture and allotment of the former divinity, nor do the gods alternately receive the places of each other, nor do demons change their allotments. Iamblichus having thus doubted, dissolves the doubts by saying, that the allotments of the gods are perpetually established, but that the participants of them, at one time derive advantage from the guardianship of the rulers, and at another reap no benefit from it. He adds that these are the participations which are measured by time, and which sacred institutions frequently call the birthdays of the gods. It has however been observed by us that this resembles that which happens about souls, for every soul has entirely a tutelar god, and certain souls choose lives adapted to other gods. Thus, therefore, every place is the allotment of a certain god, and there is a time when it becomes the allotment of some other divinity, who renders it adapted through a certain period, or through certain mystic rites established by men. For allotment is twofold, the one being essential, but the other subsisting according to habitude. But let us direct our attention to what follows. But an account of the transactions of this our city, during the space of 8,000 years, is preserved in our sacred writings. The priest assigns to the Athenians the number 9,000, receiving this also from history, but to the Satans the number 8,000, measuring the lives of the citizens by the Chiliad, conformably to the writings in the temples, for by this number, as the philosopher Porphyry says, demons also measure time. Farther still, the priest makes this narration from the sacred writings, which manifests, as Iamblichus would say, the stable guard of the mundane divine guardians. These numbers, however, happen to lives according to a probable reason, for 8,000 is a cube on a cube, but 9,000 is a tetragonic superficies on a cube. Hence the one gives depth to a superficies, and this through the indefinite duad, degrees, but the other preserves the superficies itself, in similitude and perfection from the triad, but it is the symbol of a better life, to remain in itself, and to adorn secondary natures, and it is an indication of a more imperfect life, to descend to secondary natures, to be assimilated to them, and to be filled with a certain indefiniteness. Since however even a secondary nature is not entirely deprived of similitude to divinity, the descent is through a cube, in which there is a tetradic similitude, but it is better to imitate more excellent nature through a more simple life, than through a life which is more compounded, and a square is more simple than a cube. If however you should say, that the number 9,000 is adapted to those that have their hypostasis from earth and Vulcan, for 1,000 is terrestrial, as being a cube, but 9 pertains to Vulcan, with them I many artificial forms, for 9 years fashioned, says Vulcan, in Homer. In thus speaking, you will not wander from the truth, but, in short, a cube is adapted to the terrestrial allotments of Minerva, since the decade is attributed to the heavens, and the last progression of the decade gives subsistence to the solid number 1,000. For the gods make their progression from the celestial allotments to the terrestrial, as the last. This therefore must be said by us. The philosopher Porphyry, however, in interpreting these things, supposes Vulcan to be the intellect that presides over art, but earth to be the lunar sphere, for this is called by the Egyptians ethereal earth. He says therefore that souls which derive their subsistence from divinity, but participate of the artificial, or volcanic, intellect, are disseminated in the body of the moon, souls that give themselves to the arts, dwelling there, and that they have bodies which are efflux ions of the ethereal bodies, that 9,000 years, also, are adapted to these souls, after the following manner. A myriad of years is, says he, the period of the soul which ascends and descends through the 5 stars, in order that each may have 2 chiliads, yet not successive. Time indeed is successive according to conception, for it is not without continuity. Hence all the stars have 9 lives, which is obscurely signified through 9,000 years. Ninths also are performed to the dead, and in a similar manner, some give names to those that are born in the 9th year, employing as symbols the periods of generation and production. The priest, however, does not now assume a myriad of years, but the number of 9,000, in order that those of whom he is speaking may still be terrene, but approximating to the period of a myriad of years. All this interpretation, however, the divine Iamblichus rejects, and says that the discussion here is not about lives, but about the different measures of minerval participation. It is absurd, therefore, to make mention of the periods spoken of in the Phaedrus, but if it be requisite to narrate what follows from the conception of Porphyry, it must be said that the soul lives indeed intellectually and saturnally on high, but descends first to the conception of a political life, which is Jovian. Afterwards, she excites anger, and lives ambitiously, but anger is martial. In the next place, she proceeds in her descent to desire, and venereal lives, and at last, exerts physical reasons, or productive powers, but all reasons are Hermaic, and Hermes is the inspective guardian of physical reasons. Through these, however, she is bound to body, and again, receiving a body, she first lives physically, being the supplier of nutriment and increase to the body. Afterwards, she lives epithematically, exciting genesiurgic powers. In the next place, she lives under the influence of anger, rising against her former habits, but entering into an ambitious life. Afterwards, she lives politically, moderating the passions, and in the last place, she lives intellectually. If therefore she is restored to her pristine state, her life is intellectual, and the myriad is terminated. But in generation, though she is conversant with it, in the best manner, she lives according to a deficiency by the Chiliad, and of this the number 9,000 is a symbol, being adapted to the best polity of the Athenians. I will therefore briefly unfold to you the laws, and the most beautiful, of the deeds of those citizens that existed 9,000 years ago. For, when we are more at leisure, we shall accurately discuss every particular, receiving for this purpose the sacred writings themselves. If you wish to refer what is here said to the whole order of things, the number 9,000 will manifest the total progression as far as to a cube, and terrestrial works, and likewise the life which pervades through all things. But through the word briefly, the union of many productive powers, and the comprehension of them according to intellect, are indicated. For the synoptical is an image of intellectual impartibility, but that which departs into multitude, of prolific power, multiplying, producing, and dividing forms into minute parts, through diversity. The laws are images of the divided fabrication, which is united according to intellect, but the most beautiful work is an adumbration of the orderly distribution of things which is extended to one beautiful end. For beauty subsisting according to the united, proceeds from intelligibles to the visible fabrication, and the resumption of the sacred writings, indicates the recurrence to the paradigms of them, from which also the priest being filled, delivers these things to Solon. The narration, therefore, will be concerning the divided and multiplied fabrication, which is connected by intellect, and extends as far as to terrestrial works, as may be inferred from all that has been said. In the first place then, consider the laws of these people, and compare them with ours, for you will now find here many paradigms of things, which then subsisted in your city, as Socrates summarily discussed his own polity, thus also the priest briefly discusses the laws of the ancient Athenians, in order that the latter may have a minutiae with reference to the former, and also a similitude to it, and this very properly, for the one is more universal, but the other more partial, and the one is the work of Dionysia, but the other of the fantasy. This diminution indeed may be surveyed, so far as Socrates has described a polity, but the priest laws. A polity, however, is the union and common bond of the life of citizens, but legislation is order proceeding into multitude and division, and the former is more analogous to the providential cause, but the latter to fate. But there is a similitude between Socrates and the priest, so far as both assert that they deliver the multitude of their words contractedly. Again, therefore, these things embrace wholes and divine causes, for the middle is suspended from the first fabrication, and is assimilated to it, and each indeed pertains to the universe, but the latter according to union, and one sameness, and the former according to progression and the difference of the things fabricated. Just as the third fabrication subsists according to conversion, and the first fabrication connects the war in generation celestially, but the second subordinately and according to diminution, just as the third connects the extremities of the universe. Very properly therefore does Socrates summarily deliver the laws, and the whole life of the Athenians, in the same manner as the priest, and these things may be assumed from what the priest now says, but he calls images paradigms, because the Satans participate secondarily of those things, of which the Athenians participate primarily. For though archetypes rank among the first of beings, yet images have the first order. With reference to our knowledge, as therefore things secondary by nature are said to be first, thus also they are said to be paradigms to the things that are elevated from them, and which know through them the natures prior to them. Here also, what pertains to the Athenians, indicates a more total, but to what pertains to the Satans, a more partial order. These things likewise are analogous, both in partial natures and in wholes, so that the polity which is about to be delivered, pertains to the city of the Athenians, or rather to the whole orderly distribution of things, and the laws extend to the whole world from Minerva. For every law is said to be the distribution of intellect, and is rightly said to be so, but the laws of the Athenians, being established conformably to the tutelar goddess, exhibit the distribution of the Minerval intellect. But of this kind are the laws in the universe which are defined conformably to one demiurgic intellect, and the one providence of Minerva, for the race of the priests was separated from the rest of the inhabitants, that in a certain respect all this order of the polity of the priest is more partial and more divided than that of Socrates, imitating the middle fabrication, may be learnt from the multitude and quality of the genera in the city. For in the polity of Socrates, there were 3 genera, the guardian, the auxiliary, and the mercenary. For the triad is allied to the demiurgic monad, but here there are the double of these, the sacerdotal, and the military, the demiurgic, or pertaining to artificers, and the pastoral, the venatic and the agricultural. For the middle fabrication has at one and the same time the duadic, and the triadic, and both these numbers are adapted to Minerva, but one of these indeed, viz. The triad, is immediately adapted to the goddess, but the other according to generation. For the hexad is a triangle from the triad, by the trigonic therefore, and by the hexad from the triad, the diminution and at the same time alliance to the goddess are manifested. For though every fabrication participates of Minerva, yet the first and supreme parts of the universe, and the first fabrication, and the first father, are filled from her in a more abundant degree. Thus therefore, if you alone select these genera, you will find the number adapted to the goddess, but if you add the presiding over wisdom, you will entirely find the heptad, which is of a Minerval characteristic, and this is one of the things that are of great notoriety. The feminine nature likewise of the heptad is celebrated, and that it is produced from the monad alone. 5. The monad also, the triad, and the heptad, are said to be especially images of Minerva, the first, indeed, as being intellectual, the second, as converting the monad to itself, and the third, as proceeding from the Father alone. After this manner, therefore, you may infer from numbers. It is necessary, however, from the quality of the genera, to survey the diminution and transcendency of these, for the sacerdotal is subordinate to the guardian genus, which ascends as far as to the first cause. For Plato himself in the Politicus arranges the priests under the politician, and does not impart to them political power. The military also is subordinate to the auxiliary genus, for the latter arranges in a becoming manner, and sufficiently disciplines the inhabitants of the city, but the former pursues war alone, and things pertaining to it, and participates of this study alone, and the mercenary tribe is divided into the remaining genera. The polity of Socrates therefore surpasses that of the priest, as being more comprehensive, and after a manner co-adapted to the genera prior to it, so that both from number and quality, it becomes evident to us that the polity, which is now delivered, is subordinate to that of Socrates, and will rank as the second after it. We establish, however, the analogies of the polity of Socrates to the universe, to be as follows. The genus of guardians we arrange as analogous to the celestial gods, the auxiliary genus to those more excellent natures, the attendants on the celestial gods, and the defenders of the universe, and the mercenary genus, to those powers that connect a material nature with partial souls. The first of these also is analogous to the fixed stars, the second to the planets, and the third to material natures. We may likewise assume in the celestial gods themselves, all these according to analogy. Here, however, it is worthwhile to survey how, and after what manner, these genera, enumerated by the priest, are to be assumed in the universe, for the philosopher Porphyry arranges them as follows, that the priests are analogous to the archangels in the heavens, who are converted to the gods, of whom they are the messengers, but the soldiers are analogous to souls descending into bodies. Again, the shepherds are analogous to the powers that are arranged over the herds of animals, which in arcane narrations are said to be souls that are frustrated of the human intellect, but have a propensity towards animals, for there is also a certain curator of a herd of men, and there are likewise certain partial curators, some being the inspectors of nations, other of cities, and others of individuals. But the hunters are analogous to those powers that hunt after souls, and enclose them in bodies. There are likewise powers who delight in the hunting of animals, such as Diana is said to be, and another multitude together with her of venetic demons, and the husbandmen are analogous to those powers that preside over fruits. All this administration therefore of sublunary demons is said by Plato to receive many demiurgic distributions, in consequence of looking to the effect which now is, or is becoming to be, the divine. Iamblichus, however, reprehends these assertions, as neither Platonic nor true, for archangels are not anywhere mentioned by Plato, nor does the military genus pertain to souls verging to bodies, for it is not proper to oppose these to gods or demons, for we should act absurdly, in arranging these in the middle genus, but gods and demons among the last artificers. Nor must it be admitted, that those are shepherds, who are frustrated of human intellect, but have a certain sympathy to animals, for the existence of demons who govern the mortal nature, is not derived from men, nor are those powers hunters, who enclose the soul in body, as in a net, since the soul is not thus conjoined to the body, nor is this mode of theory philosophic, but full of barbaric arrogance, nor are husbandmen to be referred to Ceres, for the gods are exempt from the proximate causes of nature. Reprehending, therefore, these assertions, he considers the priests as analogous through similitude to all such secondary essences and powers, as honor and worship the causes prior to themselves, but the shepherds, as analogous to all those mundane powers, that are allotted the government of the life which verges to body, and of the most irrational powers, and who distribute these in an orderly manner. The hunters he places as analogous to those universal powers who adorn secondary natures through the investigation of real being, but the husbandmen, as corresponding to the powers that give efficacy to the seeds that descend from the heavens to the earth, and the soldiers, to the powers that subvert everything atheistical, and corroborate that which is divine. After this manner, therefore, the divine Iamblichus interprets what is said by the priest, but it is common to both these philosophers, that they divide the fabricative genus into the pastoral, the venetic, and the agricultural, but they do not produce the four genera from one, for no one, who rightly considers the affair, can place either the pastoral or the venetic under the fabricative genus. Will it not therefore be better to interpret the passage conformably to our preceptor, by admitting that the sacerdotal and military tribes form one duad, but the fabricative and agricultural another, and the pastoral and venetic a third duad, and assuming an order of this kind, to investigate the paradigms of them, for the sacerdotal genus subsists in the anagogic gods, the military in the guardian, and the fabricative in the gods who separate all the forms, and the productive principles of mundane natures. But the agricultural genus subsists in those gods that supernally excite nature, and disseminate souls about generation. For Plato, likewise, denominates the lapse of the soul into generation, a dissemination, but whoso is most adapted to husbandmen, as is, also, to collect productions of nature. The pastoral genus subsists in the gods that govern distinctly all the forms of life that revolve in generation. For Plato, in the Politicus, delivers to us certain divine shepherds, and the Venetic subsists in the divinities that give an orderly distribution to all material spirits, for it is usual with theologists to call these gods hunters. All these genera likewise pertain to the middle fabrication, viz. The convertive genus, the guardian, that which administers the psychical allotments, that which governs the genesiurgic forms of life, everything which fabricates and gives form to material natures, and that which arranges the last order of spirits, that, however, which pays attention to wisdom, and that which is contemplative, must be considered as different from all these genera, and which the Egyptian also celebrates above all the rest, making mention in the first place, as being a priest, of the sacerdotal genus. All the genera, therefore, are 7, and the monad is exempt from the hexad, and the monad, indeed, is analogous to the one intellect which connects all the fabrication of generated natures, but the hexad is analogous to the more partial orders under this intellect, viz. To the anagogic, guardian, formalizing, and vivifying orders, and also to those that are the leaders of the herds of a tame life, and to those that rule over the brutal nature, which orders in the universe likewise are separated from the fixed stars. Moreover, he says, that these orders may be seen among men, in the first place, among the Athenians, but in the second place, among the Satans, according to the division of genera, each accomplishing its proper work in a definite manner. For he manifests this by saying, separate from others, in order that we may understand the unmingled purity of the genera, proceeding supernally through diminution, as far as to the last of things. The artificers, also, exercised their arts in such a manner, that each was engaged in his own employment without mingling with that of other artists. The same method was likewise adopted by shepherds, hunters, and husbandmen. The whole of this tetractys has, indeed, the third order, according to a section of the genera into 3, but is now enumerated by Plato as the second, in order that through this, what is said may imitate the universe, in which the last is the middle, comprehended on all sides by more divine natures, for that which is most material and gross, is enclosed by fabrication in the middle, for thus alone can it be preserved, being adorned and guarded according to the whole of itself by all the comprehending natures, in the universe. But again, it is here added, that the fabricative art was not mingled with the other arts, nor in a similar manner any one of the others with the rest, but that each remained by itself, and in its own purity, for this not only produces accuracy and rectitude in appropriate works, but likewise affects the sympathy of the citizens, for all will thus be in want of all, in consequence of each not exercising many arts, for the builder will be in want of the husbandman of the shepherd of the hunter, and the hunter of the builder, and thus each being in want of the rest, will not be unmingled with them. Hence, there is sameness in conjunction with difference, and separation accompanied with union. The warlike genus too, you will find was separated from all the other genera, and was ordered by law to engage in nothing but what pertained to war, everywhere indeed, but especially in the warlike genus. The unmingled and the separate are appropriate, for they have an alliance to the highest order, which cuts off everything material, and obliterates that which is disorderly and confused. Very properly therefore does this genus pay attention to the concerns of war, for on account of this, the city remains free from external and injurious incursions, and this invests it with a guard from itself, imitating the guardian order. For as a guardian deity is present with the first, so likewise with the middle of the demiurgy. This, therefore, may be assumed from theology, but by law in the universe, we must understand the divine institutions proceeding from the one demiurgic intellection. For prior to mundane natures is the demiurgic law, which is seated by Jupiter, and distributes together with him in an orderly manner all the providential inspection which exists in the universe. A similar armor too, such as that of shields and darts, was employed by each. These we first used in Asia, the goddess in those places, as likewise happened to you, first pointing them out to our use. The narration extends the energy of Minerva supernally from paradigms, as far as to the last genera, for there are things connoissant with this energy, participating of undefiled powers, more total and more partial, and which arrange the mundane genera from the middle fabrication. Analogously also to this, they comprehend and are comprehended, are vanquished by the Minerval energies, and remain perpetually undefiled with invariable sameness through it. In the universe, it is requisite, therefore, to know these things in common about all these particulars. We must however show what the armor, the shields, and the spears, are, and how these are antecedently comprehended in the goddess. Porphyry, indeed, calling the body the shield, assumes anger for the spear. But these pertain to souls falling into generation and to material things, and are not the instruments of immutable safety, but of a gynecurgic life, corrupting the purity of intellect, and destroying the life which subsists according to reason. The divine Iamblichus, however, explains these in a divinely inspired manner, for since it is requisite that everything divine should operate and net suffer, in order that by operating it may not have the inefficacious, which is assimilated to matter, and that by not suffering it may not have an efficacious power resembling that of material natures, which act in conjunction with passion, in order that both these may be accomplished. He says that shields are powers through which a divine nature remains impassive and undefiled, surrounding itself with an infrangible guard. But spears are the powers according to which it proceeds through all things without contact, and operates on all things, cutting off that which is material, and giving aid to every gynecurgic form. These powers, however, are first seen about Minerva. Hence in the statues of her she is represented with a spear and shield, for she vanquishes all things, and according to theologists, remains without declination, and with undefiled purity, in her father. But these have a secondary subsistence, in both the total and partial Minerval powers, for as the Jovian and demiurgic multitude imitates its monad, and as the prophetic and Apolloniacal multitude participates of the Apolloniacal peculiarity, thus, also, the Minerval number adumbrates the undefiled and unmingled nature of Minerva. This, also, takes place in an ultimate degree in Minerval souls, for in these, likewise, the shield is the untamed and uninclining power of reason, but the spear is that power which amputates matter and liberates the soul from demoniacal or fatal passions, of which powers the Athenians participate in a purer manner, but the Satans in a secondary degree, receiving these through the measure of alliance to the goddess. You may perceive, too, what great attention was paid immediately, from the beginning by the laws to prudence and modesty, and besides these, to divination and medicine, as subservient to the preservation of health, and from these, which are divine goods, the laws, proceeding to the invention of such as are merely human, procured all such other disciplines as follow from those we have just enumerated. A little farther on, he calls the goddess both a lover of wisdom and a lover of war, in order that the arrangement of the polity of the Athenians and Satans might be produced conformably to her as a paradigm, and what indeed pertains to the exercise of war, is sufficiently indicated from what has been said, but that which pertains to wisdom, he exhibits to us in the present words, in order that by the one, the philopolemic, and by the other, the philosophic nature of Minerva might be adumbrated. What then is this prudence? The theory of wholes and of supermundane natures, from which, after the first of goods which are perfective of souls, a certain facility is obtained in the concerns of human life, proceeding in conjunction with divination and medicine, and in one way, indeed, This prudence is the source of disciplines in invisible causes, in another way, about the world, and in the last place, about human affairs. For since the goddess herself is immaterial and separate wisdom, on this account, to the natures that are allied to her, she unfolds into light all the parts of divine and human prudence. For with respect to divination, also, one kind must be admitted to exist in the intellectual, and another in the mundane gods, and of the latter, one kind proceeds from the gods, another from demons, and another from the discursive energy of the human soul, existing rather as something artificial and conjectural. In a similar manner also with respect to medicine, one kind indeed exists in the gods themselves, and this is of a peonian nature, but another kind, in demons, being ministrant and subservient to the gods, from whom likewise matter and instruments are procured for the advance of the gods. For as there are many demons about love, thus also about Aesculapius, some are allotted the order of attendants, but others that of forerunners of the god. And another kind exists in human lives, being that which is imparted from theorems and experience, according to which some are adapted in a greater, and others in a less degree to divine medicine. But there is also a mixture of these two kinds of prudence, viz. The prophetic and the medicinal, with the Egyptians, because the causes of these are antecedently comprehended in one divinity, and from one fountain many streams are distributed about the world. And thus much has been said in common about the prudence which is now mentioned. In order, however, to unfold each particular more fully, we must say, that law, indeed, is the order proceeding from the one intellect of Minerva, but attention, the providence pervading from wholes as far as to material natures, and immediately from the beginning, the natural aptitude of Minerval souls to prudence. For that which is neither adventitious nor foreign, appears to be signified by these words. But if someone should refer what is said to the mundane order, because the distribution of things does not proceed from the imperfect to the perfect, but is always arranged and accompanied in its progression with that which is excellent, it appears to me that this is manifested by the words immediately from the beginning. The words, however, must be referred to the order of the whole world, because there are invisible causes of the natures that are arranged in the world, which perfect prudence, that is wisdom, primarily contemplates. For the form of prudence is not, as Porphyry says it is, artificial, or adapted to the arts. For this, as Iamblichus observes, is the gift of Vulcan, but not of Minerva. But attention was also paid to divination and medicine, because it is fit, in the first place, to contemplate the other powers of the mundane gods, and thus afterwards, their prophetic and sanative production, since we are allotted the government of a generated body, and to us who are enclosed in body, futurity is manifest. For a material life exhibits much of the contingent, and even hyparxis differently moved at different times. But by such other disciplines as follow from these, he doubtless means geometry, astronomy, logistic, arithmetic, and the sciences allied to these, all which the law having established, led the Athenians and Satans to the possession of an admirable prudence. And thus much concerning these particulars